So in this video, we will explain why the fiscal policy, including the taxation and government spending, and what's the rationale behind these tools, so that we believe they will be able to adjust the market. So first of all, I have to remind you what we talked about before about the GDP, so the national income. So part of the portion of the GDP is coming from the government purchase. So government purchase, and also the government purchase will affected by the taxation. So here we will talk about how the government used the tool to affect the one nation's economy. So first, we will look at is the government revenue. So how government getting the revenue, and so it's very easy to understand. That's taxation. So government expansion start with the 16th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution in 1913, which extended government taxing power to incomes. So prior to this, most government revenue came from taxes on imports, whiskey, and tobacco. So that's literally we're using the tax to punish the unhealthy shopping behavior, unhealthy product, and to protect the domestic producers. But after 1913, so after we start to implement the 16th Amendment, and the government had more power to obtain the revenue, that is to taxing the incomes. And so today, nearly half of the tax revenue come from individual income taxes. Social Security is the second largest revenue source, and followed by corporate income taxes. Custom, whiskey, and the tobacco taxes now account for very little. So after you find a job, if you have never worked, and you will realize that if you really make a lot of money and at the same time you pay a lot of income tax, state tax and the federal tax. But here, keep in mind, we are talking about the federal government spending, so we'll talk about the federal income tax, so federal income tax. And we mentioned before the reason we are not emphasizing the state or city income tax because for state and the city they don't allow to have deficit, but for the federal government they are allowed to have the deficit. So taking the deficit is helping the economy to back to the full employment GDP or keep the price stability. So this is about the revenue. And so after government obtain those revenue, they need to spend it. Keep in mind, government is not like business. They try to maximize the profit. So the government's job is try to maximize the social welfare to balance the consumer's interest and the business interest, and also our domestic producer interest when we are competing with the international producers. So every revenue they obtain is supposed to be used to develop the economy. So that's why we can talk about the government expenditure. So how they use the taxes they collected from income, social security, and etc. So for when we talk about government expenditure, and we have to mention about the purchases and versus transfers, purchases and transfers. And so it's easy to understand purchases, and so government do purchase the goods from the business, like I mentioned before, and they need to. If you see, for instance, like the state police, so they drive the cars, vehicles, and all the personnel need to get salaries. So those spending is considered as government purchase. So they purchase them from the labor's market, so hire the employee, and the purchase from the product market, then they are buying the vehicles and office supplies, etc. So it's easy to understand the purchase. So how about the transfers? So um, the transfers, we usually talk about income transfer. And so the income transfer don't become part of the aggregate demand until recipients decide to spend that income. So what is the income transfer then? So income transfer is the payments to individuals for which no current goods or services are exchanged. such as the Social Security. When people get old, so they will get some money if they work certain amount of years. So they will get money from the government to help them for the later older years, and also including welfare. And if you lose job, and you will get some money from the government at least for 6 months, and also the unemployment benefit. That's what I just mentioned. So this is called income transfer. And what I just mentioned earlier is government purchase. So you can see the big difference between the government purchase and income transfer is that the income transfer is depend on the recipients need to spend that income in order to shift in the AD curve. If we talk about government purchase, such as building the highways, healthcare, and so those are directly affect our aggregate demand curve. So that is income, the government revenues, and the government expenditure. So you can see when we're discussing the fiscal policy, we said fiscal policy actually are how the use of the government taxes and the spending to alter macroeconomic outcomes. So if we know that if any of the action government take can shift the AD curve, and we know it will affect the macroeconomic outcomes. And so we can see based on the taxation directly affected the government revenues, and expanding directly affected the government purchase. Purchases directly affect the government spending. So by adjusting this both sides, and the government can greatly affect the aggregate demand curve, and then which in turn may help to stabilize the economy, or help to achieve the long-term full employment of GDP. So to summarize what is said, so this tax and spending power can greatly influence aggregate demand curve. So government can alter the aggregate demand by purchasing more or fewer goods and services, raising or lowering the taxes, and changing the level of the income transfers. So keep in mind the third bullet. So the third bullet is really depends on if the recipients will literally using their income to purchase goods or not. So if they don't, for instance, they got the income, then they put under their pillows, they never use it, so that will not affect the aggregate demand at all. And so for the following videos, and you will find that we will discuss this fiscal policy from two different perspectives. So first, we will explore fiscal policy's potential to ensure full employment. So in another term, so when the economy is growing slow and our GDP doesn't meet the full employment GDP, and how can we using the fiscal policy to shifting the AD curve to the right? So that's our first part. And our second part we will explore is the fiscal policy's potential to maintain price stability. So another way is if we have a relatively very overheated economy, so it's too good, so which is pushing our price level up. So as we mentioned before, the macro goal is try to keep the stability of the economy, so we need to drag the price level down. So here we're going to look at how can we use the fiscal policy to shift our AD curve to the left, so that we can reduce the price level. So in next video, we will look at what is the fiscal stimulus, and then we're gonna look at what is the fiscal constraint, the restraints.